The open source software community. He's one of the biggest players in the last couple decades who has really helped advance open source technologies, and really great to have him here as well. And last but certainly not least, a lot of you might recognize Szymon Swistun from his contributions to Farmville. He is an architect at Zynga. Quick show of hands, who here plays Farmville? That guy! Szymon sees you. He actually previously co-founded a startup mobile gaming company called November Software, and now he's working on an unannounced mobile game. And perhaps we can have him give us a little sneak peek of, no. Damn, I was hoping all this peer pressure, you know, would get it going. And me, your lovely MC, I've been here all day, almost killed myself tripping on this wine crate. Pull this up a bit, that's as high as that goes. Fantastic. My name is Kirill. You all know me. You all love my voice, and you're going to hear a little bit more of it right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our beautiful panelists and our Ask a Developer panel. All right. So, what is it even like to be a developer? I mean, you guys are all students. You're studying computer science. Presumably, you want to have some kind of career in computer science. But what is it even like to be a developer? Like, tell me take me through a day in your life as a dev.
I guess this is me then, so I'm Randall. What up, guys? It's pretty fucking crazy. I'm not gonna lie. That's how I would sum everything up. Like, it's sort of like an adventure where you don't really know where you're going or what you're doing or what tools you have or, you know, how old you are or anything. So it's just an adventure, I would say.
Ours is, I would say, mine's a little more organized. The thing is, yeah, as a developer, I think the one weird thing that I didn't know as a student was that most of the complexity is in your head, and sometimes you can't turn it off because you're trying to solve a problem and it goes home with you, and it's in your head, right? So when you're developing software, your mind and what you have in there is actually the software. What you type is just the output of that. So that's one thing I didn't realize, but it just kind of goes with you all the time. So head's always filled with software.
Yeah. So going from the exciting and getting worse. I've been developing software for about 30 years, and oh, sorry. Yes. Starting from the exciting and getting worse. I've been developing software for about 30 years, and every day I go into work, I go into a cupboard and I bang my head on the desk. Pretty much what I get to do. Having said that, it's the most fun job in the world, I find. I actually started doing the development I'm doing without being paid for it, because it's just so much fun. And I don't know any other job where you can use your own native intelligence, your own native skills, to basically build something out of nothing, out of the air. And the feeling that you get when something works is like nothing else I know. You know, having said that, these days I come to places like this too, and actually collaborating with people is getting much more important. As software development scales up, software gets bigger, does more complicated things. The day of the lone developer sitting behind his desk, banging his head on the wall, you still do that, but these days I tend to spend a lot of the time talking to other developers, sometimes via email, sometimes by the phone. I predate IRC, so yeah.
I don't think people here even know what IRC is.
Oh, okay. So I predate whatever thing replaced IRC.
Facebook Messenger.
Probably. Again, that's a proprietary protocol. Why would you use that? Yeah. So you know, collaboration is getting to be more part of the job. With getting more depressing, I'll hand over to IBM. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Big Blue is sad. No, we have fun. So yeah, I'll kind of piggyback a little bit on what he was saying. You know, working with other people is great. Collaborating and problem solving as a group is really fun. And I feel like you're always kind of trying to solve some sort of a problem, whether it's how to build a feature and make it work well and scale, or how to like track down a bug that's really hard to find. Like you always feel like you're a bit of a detective. And then I'll also say, just like in the bigger picture of things, I feel incredibly fortunate. Like I stumbled into engineering, and I thank my lucky stars all the time that I'm in this field. I'm a technologist in New York City where I can go next door and get a job, and in the way the economy's been for a while, I feel very fortunate that I'm in high demand. It's a good space to be.
So sticking on that, you said you stumbled into it.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What were you doing before you became a developer? How did you get into it?
Well, for this crowd, I'm kind of a bad example. I've been playing in punk rock bands since I was young, and one day our drummer got a good job, and I was like, oh, how's this internet thing work? You know, what's going on here? And I view sourced and was like, oh, I can read this. This isn't like magic. And I started messing around with it, and I took some classes, and then just basically started building websites for my bands and my friends and people that we knew. And next thing I knew, I was working at Sears, and I remember thinking, like, wait a minute, is this like a career? What happened here? And then from there, yeah, it's been just kind of, it's my thing now, and I'm happy about it. Pass along.
Shall we go back this way?
Jeremy, let's hear from you. I'm really curious how you got started.
Yeah.
So when I started, there were no personal computers. I didn't see my first PC until I was about 16. So I actually didn't touch a computer until I was, in college. And I was doing a physics and astronomy degree, blundered into a PhD that was incredibly boring. And it turned out I knew how to fix the mass spectrometer control software that my supervisor wanted to work with. And that became much more fun than actually doing the PhD work, which I never wrote up. So I basically ran away and joined the software houses.
So a couple of bad examples here.
Yeah, I got my I got my stick with the with a packed lunch in it and ran away and never came back.
Nice. Yeah, I got into programming pretty early. I'm kind of a weird story because I knew exactly what I wanted to do at 13. So at 13 I was like, 3D virtual world games, that's what I want. I'm going to keep working on that. I think I was fascinated with the ability of, I was kind of even obsessed with the notion of being able to build a virtual world that I could control the rules for, and other people can play in them, and so they're just like fascinated by that. So C was kind of like the main language at the time. A friend of mine still is, maybe. Still do it, but yeah, it's different things for different purposes. But yeah, essentially the first book that I got kicked off was C for Dummies. I took it everywhere to parties, like, I get to read after, like, what are you doing? Like, I'm reading, learn. But yeah, and it was funny, the internet was alive then, but it was like nothing near what it was. You can't really, there was no social, there was no sharing, there was nothing. And so I didn't make games for any other purpose than me playing my own games. So I literally like program a little game, like a 2D shooter with asteroids, and I'd be like, ha 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 ha, okay, let's do a casino slot machine game. Oh, that's fun, okay, next game. Literally just for myself, so it was fun. And then a lot of side projects, and then eventually kind of got a job professionally doing it, and I've kept doing it, I love it, so, yeah.
So I got into mine playing video games. So when I was a kid, I was 12, and my family got this old DOS computer, and it had Wolfenstein 3D installed on it, which is like, I mean, you guys all remember, yeah. It was like this game where you try to kill Hitler, and like everyone's totally into that when you're like a little kid, you know, and you're like super psyched to like hunt this guy down. So I was playing it like a lot, like way too much probably. And I had heard from one of those game magazines at the time, I forget which one it was, this was a really long time ago. And it said that like if you're a computer programmer, you can like make hacks for video games. Like you can do God mode and all this crazy stuff. And so my mom was a librarian, and I went to the library and I said, okay, give me a book on like computer programming, because I gotta get this shit done. Like this guy is going down. And I went in there and I got the first book that I saw. I think there's only a few at the time. It was a book on scheme programming. So I brought it home and I just started on page 1. You know, I flipped the cover, I just started reading. And I get in there and like the author's like, okay, here's our first example program, and there's a bunch of text. So I did like what I'm pretty sure anyone else would do. I started the video game and I started typing that shit straight into the video game. And of course, like if you've ever written a program, you know you don't write programs in a game. So that's pretty stupid of me. And I was really determined, so I just did this over and over again. I thought I was typoing. I thought I was making a mistake somewhere. And I went through this for probably 3 days before I realized, like, you know, I skipped ahead a couple pages or whatever, and I realized, wow, you have to save this somewhere, like in some sort of file. And like, fuck, now you gotta start back from step 0. So that was my experience, super frustrating, and it's still sort of like that, actually.
I think, to say one more thing, I think kind of the takeaway, too, of all of these is like to get in there and get your hands dirty and build stuff and hack and just really kind of embrace it and dive in, and that's where you really start to learn stuff and find what parts of engineering you really enjoy, and you can kind of follow that.
And you guys have it a lot easier than I think some of us did, because there is so much wonderful quality open source code out there. I mean, when I started, people were still photocopying copies of the Lions book, if anyone remembers that, the original Unix source code, many generation photocopies from Berkeley. Now you can look at the Unix that is running the world, which is basically Linux. You can download that and have it, you know, on your machine tomorrow. And the ability to look at all this stuff, we didn't have that. We had to type in stuff from magazines, back on paper.
I have also a funny story. So I was really, you know, I used Borland C compiler back in the day, and it was all command line, and I had my one C file called fighter.c. Put it all in one big file. I was like, it was like a ship game, and it ran a little slow. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna optimize this. Again, okay, you have to bear with me. I'm 13. Okay, I'm gonna optimize this. So what do? I manually run and remove all white spaces from the entire file.
That'll make it go faster.
Manually. I didn't like write. I didn't write. Again, like I just need this. I need to get this done. I just like go through it all. It's like one big line, and I compile it and I run it. I'm playing the game like this doesn't seem any faster. I made no backup. I have no source control. And I'm like, oh crap! I can't. I'm like, all right, I gotta make a new game now. I can't even do that. So we're not. You work. Yeah, you baby step your way there, right?
So that's how you learn. Yeah.
I have no additional comments.
Awesome. So yeah, Jeremy, you touched on a key point that I want to go into is, you know, hacking and getting your hands dirty and building. So where can people find projects to work on and get involved with? Like, where do you even go? There's so much out there, but it can be overwhelming. Where do you even start?
So much though I hate to do corporate pitches, but Google, my group in Google runs something called Google Summer of Code for college students, and we also, for high school students, we run something called Google Code-In. What that allows you to do is to pick small bite-sized projects that you can use to get started on open source code, and the best thing is Google will pay you to do it. It's complicated, you know, but go to, you can search for this and find it. But that's a great way to get started. And at that point, you're working on real projects, doing real work, and you're essentially, you know, you're learning to do, starting off simple for especially Google Code-In, but getting more complicated with Google Summer of Code. And if you do things right, you can end up joining the project or becoming a member of the open source community.
Yeah, I would encourage that, and even just getting involved in open source in general. You know, if you're for some reason interested in, say, linting JavaScript, you know, go to like ESLint, and a lot of times these projects that are well maintained, like ESLint or other kind of bigger projects, they'll have issues that are tagged for newbies and like first PRs. And a lot of people are trying to, a lot of organizations are trying to make it really easy for like first committers. And I think the important thing is to you know, not be bashful, just get in there. And even if you make a mistake, it's okay. Usually people are pretty nice and you learn from those mistakes. I remember I just tried to update a README a while ago, and And I was like, oh, you left the commas in at the end. And they're like, no, this is Node. We leave the commas in, or whatever. I don't remember what it was. Somebody was particular about it. And it's like, oh, okay. You know, this is somebody else's style. It's cool. But the point being, like, just get in there and find something that you're interested in and try to figure out a way to contribute to that project. And another kind of benefit from that, and I've seen this firsthand, is if you get involved in projects like that, especially ones that people are using, you may get some visibility to some other companies. We hired a young gentleman who was doing stuff with ESLint, actually it was JSCS at the time, and he was doing great work, and we were like, hey, why don't you come and work for us? And you know, it was great for both of us.
I would say one thing that helped me a lot is kind of knowing ultimately what you want to produce. Like, programming is just like a means to an end. Like, writers write, but they want to write a screenplay or write a novel. Like, programming is just a language. You want to build a product, you want to build a service, you want to do something with it. So knowing ultimately what you want to do really helps focus in your research and like how you find it. I would say right now in this, like, I use Facebook for personal stuff, like friends, but I use Twitter for my professional network. So like, I specialize in graphics, 3D, and games, and so like, I follow all the best like 3D graphics game guys that I know of, and I attach, and I usually get a lot of information, kind of new trends, new techniques, new things from that feed. So I would recommend that if you guys kind of know the rough area you want to go into, you can find fairly good people on Twitter to follow, and they kind of will probably trickle down some information to start as a seed. But I would say most of what I developed was just side projects. I was very curious. I think curiosity is one of the strongest traits that I look for, is just digging deep. How does that work? How does that work? Why does that one? Why did it go this way? Why did it do that? How do I get that? And just going really deep, and just you'll be able to learn a lot and develop the skills that you want to achieve ultimately what you want to produce, I think. So I'll do side projects, Google, searching. And Twitter is actually a good place for building a professional network of people to trickle down information to you for what you want to do.
I don't have much to say. Everyone else did a great job summarizing this. So the one thing I would say though is, like, there's no reason you need to get involved in open source when you're just getting started. Like, just build stuff and be totally selfish about it. That's fine too. Like, if you're working on a spreadsheet for your job or your class or whatever, and you write like a 5-line Python script to automate some of that pain away, like, there's no reason to open source that. Don't feel compelled to contribute to it or whatever. Just have fun with it, do a job, and like, as you get better and better, you'll sort of like, you know, develop those skills and they'll come naturally. So I wouldn't even worry about the whole purpose of professional development or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. That's just my 2 cents.
That's a good point.
If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
Yes, absolutely. So a couple times open source has been mentioned, and I know a lot of you guys are really big on open source, and I just want to ask, you know, how would you explain what it is, and more importantly, what really makes you excited about open source software?
So what I really like about open source software is that, like, it serves like a few purposes that like pretty much everyone is totally on board with. So number one, when you write open source software and you just make it publicly available to the world, right? It's just sort of like a nice thing to do because everyone else, like all your friends and stuff, can see it and use it. 2, it's sort of like personally gratifying because like when you build something, if you have like one other person who uses it, it makes you feel like a total baller. It's true. You feel like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I can't believe someone's using this thing that like I created. You feel really just like awesome. So it helps your confidence and it makes you feel a little better. And you know, the other thing too is like if you're building complicated stuff, you really need a lot of people to contribute. You know, it's not possible to do everything by yourself. And like, these guys are like a total testament to that. I guarantee they're gonna say the same thing. Like, it allows you to get better at working with other people, which is the hardest part of programming. Like programming itself, you can sit there, you can write a line of code. It will always do the same thing. But like working with people is way more difficult. It takes way longer to develop those skills. So like contributing to open source stuff is the best way to get better like people stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, but the great thing about open source, the thing I love the most is, firstly, it gives control back to people. It's quick buzzword these days, Internet of Things. I just want to do a quickie on that. Think about this. In the future, your doorknob is going to be a computer that's running software. Who can control that software? Who wrote that software really matters. If you can't see that source code that's running in your doorknob, you don't really have control of your door. So that's a big thing for me, basically making sure that everybody can see the code that's helping to run their lives. So it's kind of like the scientific method as applied to software. And then the other thing is, you know, as someone who's written a lot of software out there, putting it out there is still an intimidating thing to do, let other people see it, because it sucks. Everybody's code sucks. I mean, and you know, the first time some 14-year-old from India mails you something and says, "You idiot, you broke this," and you're like, "Oh, yeah, you're kind of right, I did, didn't I?" You know, and having other people look at what you do and review it, it keeps the level of humility that you really have to do to build complicated software, because building complicated software is probably the most complex thing that human beings can do, and no one does it right. And so being able to, and the other thing about it is you'll find out what communities you want to work with by the way they react. If you mail them something and you say, "You sucked, this is broken," if they respond defensively and aggressively, they're not people you want to be working with. If they're like, "Oh yeah, you're right, do you want to come work with us some more?" They're the people you want to be working with. And so open source is this wonderful way of discovering who people are, controlling the software that controls your lives, and you know, developing your skills. So with that, I should hand over. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't deal with it as much. I think the rest of the panel, the experts. I actually primarily focus on internal proprietary stuff because only recently game engines have become more open. I think Unity is big. They're still on open source. Their code, Unreal 4, is probably one of the bigger ones that all their code is out on GitHub, and they have a different business model. But I think to the previous statement is probably the best one. The difference, there's a lot of differences, but one key difference between good engineers, and that's just good engineers, it's actually designers, artists, the like, anyone in the professional industry, is the ones that aren't personally attached to their work. It's the ones that, look, here's something I did, it serves a purpose, let's critique it independently of me or you, it doesn't matter. So the people that can take good criticism, it's not just engineering, all of the disciplines, are the ones that are looking beyond themselves and looking at the product they're trying to achieve, and that's something that open source helps facilitate early, which is really, really good. I do want to throw out one downer that I've encountered. The thing is, open source is great because it moves things forward faster than you can move without it. The downer, though, is that the quality, right? Like, you have to make sure that you understand what's happening in the inside and you vet it yourself and not assume it's to a certain standard that might be assumed because it's out there. So I think that the quality level is open, and you have to be willing to put in the extra time to vet it and to stress test it. In the end, you save time anyways, then you can share it back. But I think you can't go in blindly. You do have to do a little bit of vetting because it might bite you as well.
Well, and I think sometimes that's actually impossible, thinking about like NPM dependencies and the dependencies of dependencies and the dependencies of dependencies. So sometimes you can't even do that. But I agree, like being able to look at your main dependencies and know that is quality is important. And I think a lot of what was touched on are like really the important parts of open source, community and people, visibility into the code. But I think another thing too is just like the utility of it. Not inventing the wheel. You know, I need to do something. I have this bigger picture thing I want to do, but there's this little part that I need to get done. Look, somebody else has already wrote it. You know, okay, it looks good. I'm going to just use it, and it kind of helps you to build out your projects faster and kind of really, for lack of a better term, get to market faster and just get things built. So the utility aspect of it as well. Yeah.
So if I could just touch a little bit on the quality, sort of comparing open source and proprietary. You can have bad quality open source code. You can have terrible quality proprietary code. I used to write proprietary code a long time ago, and one of the things about that, you can get away with stuff. It's like, no one's ever going to see this. Do I have to validate all inputs? Nah, not really. Just the ones that I know I'm going to see. That's okay. Once you put that stuff out there, especially with security-related things, you can't get away with that anymore. But having said that, there's an awful lot of people putting an awful lot of open source out there that they don't test properly. So you know, the best open source, I would say, stands as the highest quality software I've ever seen. But the worst open source is some of the lowest quality software I've ever seen. It's a bigger, yes, OpenSSL, thank you. It's a little mean. There's a lot of people. I know the guys who wrote that, and you know they were underfunded, abandoned, and everyone was using them. So, but yeah, the range is very wide. The range of proprietary software is usually a little less, but I haven't seen, the best open source code I think is better than the best proprietary code I've ever seen.
And I'll add too, like the first thing that I do when I go to look at an open source project I'm considering using is look and see if there are tests, if there's like any linting and code sniffing, and also just go and look at the pulse and see if there are a lot of open issues, see how many issues have been resolved recently in the last week or month, if pull requests are getting merged. Like if it's an active project that seems like there's a healthy community being involved in it, then you can feel a little more confident taking it on.
Awesome. Love it. I love those diverging viewpoints. That's what I was about to say. Is enough of my boring questions. I got a few more I'll probably chip in at the end. But I want to hear what you guys have to say. I want to hear all your burning questions. So before I jump into that, I want to hear from you a little bit. So I'm going to ask you A or B. Just yell out. Yell it out, whatever you say. You ready? I want to get you guys' energy up. Here we go. Tabs or spaces?
Tabs.
Tabs. No, I don't know. I think Tabs won that one. I'm a Tabs guy myself. All right. Vim or Emacs?
Vim.
Emacs suck it. Notepad++. All right, and last one. iOS or Android?
Android.
Windows. All right. If I could have a mic runner, you sir, come here. Go ahead and take this mic, put it in that mic stand, and then whoever has a question, jump up, and then let's ask her a bunch of questions. Right here, come up to the front, come up to the front. Got a mic. Come up to the mic, line up, everyone who wants to ask a question, come on up. Don't be shy, don't be shy.
Be shy. Come on.
We got an awesome panel. Ask them anything you want. Ask them what their favorite food is. I know Randall likes Brussels sprouts and chicken. Apparently my pizza wasn't good enough for him. Oh man, sorry. Don't blame me, blame Papa.
Yes, bro.
Hold the microphone and then pass it on to the next person.
Go ahead.
Okay, ready?
Just hold it or shout. We'll be all right.
Yeah, so my question is, as a new grad, should I go to work for the startup or the well-established corporation to learn experience to be a good engineer in the future?
That's a good question, and it may be a matter of preference. I've never been a huge fan of startup culture. Like, I don't know, I kind of value my free time and stuff like that. I have other hobbies that I think are healthy to have as a person in general. So while I've worked at a couple of startups, I've always tried to make sure that I maintain a good, healthy work-life balance. I think there are also two different kind of paths you can take, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you can do more of like a breadth of learning or a deeper dive on certain technologies. I personally have done more of a breadth and like know some of a lot of things rather than a lot of one thing, which I appreciate, although you know I see the value in the other for sure. So my personal preference is to do more like mid to larger companies where you can develop a variety of skills, whether it's engineering or even just interpersonal and how you operate in a company and you know career growth kind of stuff. But you know, startup has if that's your thing, then there's a lot of benefits there as well.
I actually had that, so when I graduated, I actually had that conundrum as well. So I had a choice between going to a startup game company or EA or Microsoft, but they weren't doing games, so why would I consider don't know why I interviewed there. So I did. Free trip. But I think I made the decision to go to EA because I wasn't confident yet in my skills, right? I had high ambitions. I wanted to do games that lasted. I wanted to do really ambitious things. And I didn't feel I could go into a small environment and take on a lot of hats and be really good yet. So I wanted to build my skill set before jumping in. And that was just the preference I wanted. But I think it depends on you. What do you want to go after? What do you want to learn? What speed do you want to go at? That can help. So, but that was at least my experience.
So I've done a bunch of startups in my life, and to be honest, do both. Do both. You're young enough, you need experience in both kinds of environments. The startups, if they're small enough, you will learn an incredibly diverse set of skills, because when you go in a startup and it's small enough, there's no assigned people to do anything. You pick up what needs doing, and you learn whatever needs to be done to get that job done. And so some people thrive in that environment and never want to leave it. You go to a larger company, there's more structure, you get more resources. The one thing I'm going to say in this industry is, if you're not changing jobs every 3 years or so, you're probably doing it wrong in terms of learning new skills and doing different things. So do both. I don't think you have to just have one. Okay.
Thanks. Next question.
Hi there. So this is a bit of a two-part question. So first of all, I'm more of a jack of all trades rather than a specialist, which I kind of find it very difficult to me to even get considered for an interview. So how would I go around trying to get getting interviews if I'm not the one who's into specializing?
I would say when you interview, tailor your resume and your interview approach for the job that you're interviewing for. So even though you have an array of skills, like focus on the ones that you know they're looking for. And so you don't have to go in there and say, oh, I know a little bit of everything, but I don't know, too much about this one thing. Don't overrepresent yourself. I think that's an important thing. Be honest about what you know. But certainly try to highlight what it is that they're looking for, and present yourself in the best light with that in mind. And you can talk about the other skills as well, but that's the focus.
And that's wonderful advice. The other thing that I've seen, because I know that we use this internally to get people noticed, I know this is my thing, but we look at open source developers, people who have track record contributing to projects. If they're known in the project, that's the way to get noticed. Most of the people who do the Linux kernel full time, they didn't start out as, I'm going to be a Linux kernel expert. They got noticed and they got hired to do what it was they were doing anyway.
And I'll say that when I hire people, experience is one thing. There's actually something I look for beyond experience typically is growth potential. So it's like, okay, you know this, great, but I look at, okay, do you like games? We're at a game company. Do you understand how they work? Let me give you a problem. Let's solve it together. How deep can you go? When do you give up? How curious are you? Yeah, I actually tend to over-index into those attributes, because even if you come in at a lower maybe immediate potential to the rest of the team, if you have a high growth potential, that means in 2, 3, 4 years of the company investing in you, you could become a rock star. So aligning your passion and allowing your curiosity into what you want and having that show, in some organizations, shines brighter than just your experience.
Thank you.
You had a second question? Or was that
no, yeah, that was two-part.
okay.
Thank you.
So my question is,
Yep.
so my question is, as programmers, what do you do when you hit a brick wall? When you're working on a project and there's a deadline, and you hit this brick wall, how do you deal with that?
Man, I hate answering some of these questions because I have no valuable feedback for a lot of stuff. So, your question is really hard to answer because you have a deadline. and you're stuck, right?
Yeah.
So the solution is you either get rid of the deadline or you fix that brick wall. You know what I'm talking about? So those are your only two options, really. I don't have a lot of. I mean, I would just debug stuff until you get it right. I guess. I'm sorry.
Stack Overflow.
Okay. I've hit a lot of brick walls. So I actually love brick walls. I think that's the most exciting time. Well, so it depends on what you want to do. So in a typical project, there's 3 levers that can be pulled. Scope. So maybe we're not going to do that feature for this milestone. There is team. You can add more people. And there is time. I could work late. Right? So those are the 3 levers, that's it. Sometimes one is able to be pulled, sometimes other ones are able to be pulled. I would say like, I'll give an example. The first game I worked on out of school was Madden for 360. It was a launch title for EA. They can't miss their deadline. It's football. Like, June, whatever. Like, they're not missing that date. And they had huge problems. And there was very few people in the company that knew how to optimize the thing. I was one of them, weirdly enough. Because I studied shaders in college. It was a kind of a new thing. But it was more like, there were so many brick walls, but it was more you just kind of have to remove, if the option is my time, which at that time I wanted to use my time, because I wanted to solve it, I also wanted to prove myself. Then the strategy to take then is just, there is no brick wall. Like, you just have to find the right thing to bend. You have to find the right rule to break, essentially. So, at least in game development, the engineers that are good are the ones, the engineers that are okay are the ones that are like, okay, here's my design, here's my art, I'm going to work within this box and just do my engineering. Those are okay. The really good engineers are the ones that see the game as a game, and when they hit a brick wall, they're like, you know what, if I tweak the design a little, or if I change this art just a little, most people won't notice, and then the whole thing runs 4 times faster. And then you just make that call. And then, yes, I cheated, but yeah, that's getting past the brick wall. So I would say, if you can move one of the other levers, great. If you can't, find a way to cheat. And not like a cheat on a test, but it's like find some other variables not obvious to you that you can actually tweak to then get past it. Because if you look at the product as a product, not as your job being writing code, your job is writing a product. There's other levers that can be changed that may not be obvious to get past the wall.
So this is why I love open source, because it's done when it's done. Somebody stresses me about the feature they have to have, I'm like, whoa, your patch is always welcome. so things get done. My take on this is more about the technical issues. What happens when you reach a technical wall? You know, talking to your teammates or whatever, you just ask other people and get their feedback. Sometimes you're the expert and no one else knows how to do it, and you've got to figure it out, and it's not coming. So what I find then, a technique, I'm going to try and say it in a polite way. Let's just say, talk to any random stranger. It's not the original name for it, but so you go up to someone who knows almost nothing about what it is you're doing, and you explain the problem to them. And it doesn't really matter whether they understand or whether they're talking back to you or they're just nodding or, you know, or going, why is this weirdo talking to me in a public park? You just explain the problem to them. And what will happen is sometimes in doing that, your brain will find the answer. And I've had that happen to me several times. You know, I start explaining things to my son, you know, who's much more interested in playing with Lego. And by the time I finish explaining it, I have a new idea.
So I'm very curious what term you were trying to skirt around.
We're all adults here.
Yeah, well, we call it, and I know this is a common phrase in software engineering, rubber ducking. I have no idea where you're going. And I think it is a very practical technique. I had a friend that I used to work with at Sears, and we sat next to each other, and this used to happen all the time, where I would turn to him and I would start explaining the problem, and this is what I'm seeing, this is the error message I'm getting, which is making me think this other thing, but it's really doing this. And as I would talk through it, I would actually arrive at the answer myself, and I'd be like, oh, I think that's it. And then he would turn to me and go, I'm sorry, what were you saying? It was like a routine, but it always helped me. And I realized later on that that's called rubber ducking or some other thing. And it's just helpful to talk through it. And I think it's also healthy to take a break. So, you know, if you hit a wall, maybe go for a walk or something and allow your brain to kind of absorb some of it.
Stops working.
Yeah, but, you know, to take a break, I think is good. Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing, like I realized again after not saying anything, one thing that what I said is the official way of doing it is that validate your assumptions. They might not be the right assumptions. So when you're solving a problem, you kind of go into it with like, oh, I'm assuming this, and you get stuck in a brick wall. What I talked about going beyond the engineering thing is essentially validating assumptions. Like, wait, is that actually true for all cases? Is there something I can squeeze here, and you might, 9 times out of 10, there's something you can tweak in your assumptions to actually get past the wall. That's kind of the, if you keep that in your mindset, you'll be able to get past your brick wall.
Give it to him.
I'm sweating up here.
Hi there. I have a question on my phone. How likely is it that a student or a recent graduate, undergrad, who hasn't had work experience in industry, but has worked on projects before, get a lead position and not an entry-level position? This is assuming that this person is really good at what they do and they can lead. Has that ever happened before in your experiences?
I finally have an answer I can give. It's just as So this is actually what happened to me in my life. So I've been programming since I was a young kid, since I was 12. I went to UC Santa Cruz and I dropped out after 2 years. And I was like, well, I wasn't sure what sort of job I was going to go into. And so what I did is I applied for, I looked at Craigslist. I found all the IT jobs, not programming jobs, IT jobs. And I found this company called Finality, which is a phone company. They're still around today, down in LA, which is where I lived at the time. And I applied there. And when I went in to do the interview, they were like, oh, so what do you do for fun? I was like, well, I've been working on like the OpenBSD kernel and like adding these improvements and stuff. And they looked at me and they're like, okay, well, you know, you just need to like help with our help desk stuff here. I was like, oh yeah, I know, I'm like pumped for that. But you guys were asking what I do, you know, on my free time. And they're like, well, have you ever considered like working as a developer here? And I was like, well, that'd be awesome, but I don't have a degree. And they were like, well, like half of our people here don't have degrees. And that was the first time it ever even occurred to me, like, maybe you don't need to have a degree just to get a job as a developer. I had no idea at the time. I was totally naive. So they brought me on, and they put me in charge of their open source phone system product at the time. And I literally started as a lead developer there. And I was working on a team of 2 people, so it was me and 2 other people. And after being there for maybe 6 months, they promoted me again, and they put me in charge of their professional services department to do custom stuff because I was really good at working on the open source product. So it can definitely happen. I mean, I think the odds are generally pretty low. But like, if you're really good at what you do, I think the biggest thing is like knowing what you're good at and being able to convey that to people really clearly. So as long as you're straightforward and honest with people, I think you can do pretty much whatever you want.
Yeah. In my experience, very, very little I've seen that. I think there's a few game startups I've seen that their CTOs, their lead engineers were kind of new. So in the startup world, you can do that. But I think I haven't seen that a lot, not because the candidate is an undergrad or doesn't have the experience. It's actually that most of the companies I work for just don't hire in leads, period. Because the lead role is, it's not about your technical ability, it's how you work with the team. It's like 50-50. So you could be the best engineer, that doesn't mean you'll be a good lead. So most of the companies I worked with and most of the teams, they don't even hire in leads that are the most experienced leads. You come in as like a senior programmer or an entry-level programmer, and then leads come out of the teams that they identify as like, okay, this person knows how to work well with these groups and these people like working with him. So leads kind of usually grow out of teams internally from the companies I've worked with, just because it's such a collaborative environment.
It's more organic.
Yeah, it's more organic in general.
So again, open source is your friend on this. If you can start working in an external project, an open source project, the people who help run my projects aren't people who were hired in any way, shape or form to do that. They learn to do that by interacting with the community. And so they become leaders, and then they get hired as leads. I mean, you're right, it is rare for anyone to be hired straight as a lead, but they get hired into a more senior role than they would have done without that experience. And if you can do it publicly, if you have a record, if people can look at what you're able to do, it's a lot easier to convince them to hire you than if you're coming in saying, trust me, I really know this stuff, I'm smart. You know, if you can say, yeah, I know this stuff, I'm smart.